preventing fraud while limiting customer friction.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for taking the time to be here and talk about cybersecurity, something I find particularly interesting, but for most people it's extremely boring. So I'll try and do my best to sort of bridge that gap, right? I'll be the moderator for the next 4 panels. So to sort of save myself the hassle of an intro down the line, very, very simple. I've been in the cybersecurity space for about 7 years full time. I've seen some very interesting things. That's my TLDR. Let's introduce the guests. We have Brittany.
Yes, so my name is Brittany Allen. I'm a trust and safety architect at Sift, which is a fraud prevention or anti-fraud platform. And my experience comes from working on the front lines of fraud prevention for companies like Etsy and Airbnb. And while I did that within the world of trust and safety and fraud prevention, that's increasingly overlapping with cybersecurity. And I find that we're being brought in more and more to those discussions. So I'm happy to join today.
Thank you. And we have Mr.
Hi there, I'm Ian. I'm Chief Risk Officer of Kwiff. So Kwiff is a B2B, B2C operator. And obviously, we have a good customer base in different markets, different geographies, and they want something. Some of them are good customers, some of them are not good customers. But we have to deal with them all as they come in the online sphere. So yeah, it's certainly a huge impact to operations. It can skew your numbers quite quickly, give you a false sense of security. And then, you're really running a little headless at some points when it's inside your walls and your perimeters and it's breached. So there's huge challenges.
Yeah. So okay, let's start off there actually. So for sort of the sake of context, operator and fraud service provider. That's the super TLDR summary, right? So let's talk about something like bonus abuse, right? I think that's a really, really good place to start. So AI is now sort of at the forefront of people's minds, right? Even grandma has seen ChatGPT or at least heard the acronym. So AI is now a sort of much more accepted type of tech, at least in the fraud prevention space. But how does it specifically affect something like bonus abuse, for example?
Shall I? So it's an intrinsic part of our industry, right? We have to bring in eyeballs, we have to bring in revenue, we have to bring in new players. So obviously, if you didn't want that abuse, the real sensible way is to turn off that product, turn off bonuses, turn that off, and you probably will limit your bonus abuse. That's not
really realistic, though, right?
Not going to happen. The structure of our industry means it's quite necessary. So yeah, that's the opportunity really for us as teams and service providers and technology to try and learn from what's being done to us, because unequivocally they'll be using similar technologies to try and get into where we are. To try and take advantage of that, to capitalize on that. So you can start in a more manual approach, which is develop your product, your offer, your bonus to be less encouraging, i.e., come on, let's not give away the farm and try and buy super value. But again, slim pickings at the bottom, middle of the range, people are still going to come and attempt that because there's still value within it. And that's the value they're looking for. That will then create their need to do mass market approach of it. For your doors to be absolutely hammered by, let's say, 10% to be difficult traffic, to try and sneak in a good solid chunk of your business that you might not be noticing, and using any kind of technology, and most likely constantly evolving and changing technology. So once you've got an indication, it's changed.
Absolutely.
Once you've got a grasp of it, so that AI that develops with it, grows with it and learns with it, we have to utilize, because it's probably being utilized against us much more than we know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where I'd love to chime in.
Please.
So looking at what tools the fraudsters are using in order to attack websites, they have a highly developed motion for that already. It's something that they use similarly to take advantage of free trials on streaming platforms or anything else that can be sort of repeatable to get that value within the first 14 or 30 days of using an account. And so if it's just as simple as spinning up a whole bunch of accounts that each get to use a certain promotional bonus and then selling those or selling access to those, not only do they already have a motion for that, but they know they have a market for that because they also do that with referral bonuses already. I used to work for Airbnb. I've seen that in real time coming through our platform as people did, fake referrals and built up a lot of credit to then spend. So when it comes to the tools that are available, it's not just something that, you have to figure out how to use as a fraudster, but you can also purchase it as fraud as a service too. So we'll see a lot of offerings where all it takes is turning over a certain amount of cryptocurrency, maybe 20% of the total value of the accounts they're going to buy. And then a fraudster will take care of everything for them, share certain logins, get everything set up, even give them a portal where they can take actions through that portal that the fraudster has built in their tool. And the person who bought that just, simply interacts in that manner and doesn't even really know what the full mechanics behind it are. They just know they're getting what they paid for at a huge discount. So knowing that all of that already exists and that fraudsters are making up a whole business and supporting themselves and even teams in some cases with the income that they're pulling in, you have to absolutely be willing to leverage those advances in technology yourself, or you're already so far behind who you're fighting against.
So let's dive into that a little bit, right? So I think we can sort of all agree here that tech is inherently agnostic. It's not good or bad, right? It's just a question of how it's used. So based on what you said, did I understand correctly that you spend time actively researching what these malicious tools specifically are and how they're used, or do you just know about them in general? How do you tackle that?
So just in brief, we do spend time researching that at Sift, and part of it is the idea of being aware of what fraudsters are doing and what is available, but then also trying to future-proof against the advances that we see. So we've been watching fraudsters talk about AI for months and months. And it's actually a really interesting conversation because they find uses in generative AI tools like ChatGPT that will allow them to improve, let's say, phishing emails or their scam websites. But then we'll also see them get into discussions about some of the more advanced tech like deepfake visuals and voices. And they'll say, well, that's really worth it for a big target. Like if I'm going after somebody's high roller account, someone who has a lot of funds on file, it's very worth it to leverage that against them, but not so much just for all of the other targets, like the smaller value targets, because they say some of the tech they've already got works anyway. We'll see that come in also for banking fraud. As long as you and I are used to our banks communicating with us via a robocall or a text, and we don't actually need to interact with a live human voice, why bother deep faking some sort of live human voice interaction to then complete a OTP or SMS verification? They're going to adopt that technology when it is worth it and they get an ROI on that effort. But it's not, to the level yet where all of that advanced technology is being used for every type of fraud attack.
Yeah, so that is, I think, the key difference, right, between security and fraud. The ROI on fraud is black and white. The ROI in security is no one has any idea, right? Which is, I guess, one of the biggest problems in the industry, other than the fact that compliance is usually the main driver. But let's go back to the argument which Ian mentioned earlier, right? He's like, we can, have certain bonus systems, for example, which can be structured in a way that can't be too easily abused, rather don't seem, like extremely attractive. But then there's a cost, right? And then there's the marketing cost on that. So with the same exact logic, if you implement some kind of AI solution, and this I think is probably the biggest problem, I would say, with any sort of fully AI automated security solution, is the false positive rate is entirely a black box. Now, the arguments I've heard for this is that from service providers is that, yeah, you'll know it's a false positive rate if you receive a customer complaint inquiry. But in reality, if I've come to your site, I've tried to play and sign up, and you've made it even a little bit difficult, I'm done, right? I'm done. So how do you deal with this problem with specific service providers, and how do you as a service provider view it?
Friction is a major issue. We have to appease our audience, right? We have to
Absolutely
keep them sweet. That's what bonuses are for. That's what good user experience is for. That's what good account management is for. That's what, loving your income stream effectively. That's what it is.
Absolutely.
That's what those players are. Giving them the best that they can have and what they need. You can do that in a couple of ways, obviously. You can not do it and say, look, there's a cost of doing business here and I have to swallow that, I'm afraid. Like, if you come to this game and say, look, I'm never going to have fraud, 100%, I'm going to eradicate all of it, you'll send yourself a little bit crazy. I think you have to make some exception here to really recognize it's going to be part of your portfolio, and you're doing whatever you can to mitigate it, to keep that good. So your ROI comment, yes, you can put some categorization to it, but it's never 100%, I don't think. And then you can utilize, and we should utilize, third parties who put their heart into that, just like we put our heart into making Kwiff a great brand. We want to see, that quality of service come from our service providers, come into us and teach us, and maybe we teach them back about how we run our business and maybe the risks that we may have coming into our business and how that service provider can provide us. Because I would love to have that in-house. I would love to have that resource internally. I would love to have that skill set internally, but we're struggling to make it exist, not just in Malta, but probably everywhere. Like, we're all looking to get that little bit of edge in every sector of our business, and this is no different. So the acquisition, of that talent, that set, that's where third parties, teach us, they grow with us, hopefully, and lead us in the right path. Like, having these tools used to maybe be a way to scare off certain fraudsters. It might put them off a little bit. Of course, that doesn't happen anymore. I'm sure they're seeing it as a challenge now. They're recognizing the value there. Actually, I know what that tool does. I know that device fingerprinting. I know how to beat it. You become more of a target that way. So again, it's a third-party relationship where that has to continue to evolve, just like maybe the industry has tried to evolve in different sectors and bring on different issues. You mentioned one already, like bringing crypto, developing your bonus, developing your customer retention sort of structures. Those things that you do, well, that evolves, so should the fraud rate.
Sure.
And our tackling.
So what you're saying is basically fraud something you live with, account for, and take it on as a business risk. Brittany, what do you think?
So I want to throw out a couple comments about false positives, because I think it's really important to bring that up. And so first thing to point out would be knowing what signals for you are the strongest indicators of a legitimate customer on your platform, and then the strongest indicators of fraud can help you separate out more of that gray area in between, and then try to assess what may or may not, be trustworthy or maybe a false positive. So a good example being, we once looked through a sign-up flow at one of the companies that I worked for and realized that 100% of the time, and this will make sense, somebody signed up and copied and pasted all of their info in. It was fraud. You never would copy and paste Brittany, copy paste Alan, I would either type my name in or it would be auto-filled in the browser. And so that was a signal, 100% fraud. And in that case, we could say with, very high accuracy, if we reject this person, there's no false positives from that pool. And then being able to filter that down leaves you with fewer and fewer potential transactions that might fall into a false positive, definition.
Sure.
And then you can do QA from that group instead of the larger group. It may not be perfect, but it's still something you can go forward with. And then I would also say, looking at the reporting sources for your false positives, you mentioned earlier someone writing in and complaining. So a user appeal saying I wasn't able to use my account or I got locked out for whatever reason. Also looking at any reviews online. Do you have app reviews or Google reviews that might have those complaints? Looking for any other contact points and looking for people who come back to your platform with the same device that had previously been rejected or some of the same info, but they got through that second time and that then didn't end up being fraudulent. That should also be considered within your false positives.
So I don't doubt for a second that the example that you just gave that's a fantastic best practice on how to structure a reliable risk score, right?
It needs resources though, right? You need to invest in this.
Which when you can automate,
The resources
always
is one
best.
part, sure, but the false positive problem, I would say, is somewhat different. So yes, there are plenty of methods of reducing it, but take something like, for example, AVG antivirus. Okay, software is old as time. Literally, when you think of that Microsoft fucking paperclip, right? You think of AVG. That's kind of how old it is. Something that old that gets threat feeds from so many different government sources, so many different private sources. They've been doing this for so long. They still end up with a false positive rate, right? And it's much easier to determine a false positive in cybersecurity than it is to determine it with fraud, because one's data, the other one's a human, right? And there's you can read one directly, the other one you have to sort of extrapolate. So, and while I agree with you that yes, you can check, if somebody left a bad complaint and stuff like that, but how many times did you go to a restaurant, had a really shitty meal, and you were so pissed off that you actually went online and said, this place sucks? The vast majority of the time, you just say, I'm never going back there again, and you speak to all of your friends, and that's what happens, right? So,
oh yeah, we can also throw in loss of market share. We can also throw in some of the other stats, but in general, I wanted to give some positive recommendations, but no one ever said our job was easy. That's for sure.
Absolutely not. It's just I'm just trying to weigh the sort of costs between security and I guess business, right? So let's look at this from a different angle. Let's say you very rightly said, Ian, that fraud is a sort of cost of doing business, right? It's the same in very many industries. If you've got a retail shop, if you've got a supermarket, you're accounting for 0.5% of all of your stock to be stolen, right? That's just kind of how it is over the period of a year, right? But stuff like this doesn't happen in, let's say, the military, for example, right? Now, obviously, there's a stark difference between the military and a gambling operation. But would the idea of a separate, let's say, zero trust stream be something that could be a potential solution? So you have the stream whereby we accept fraud, and that's how it is. And because there's fraud, then everyone is paying for it, right? Is there some kind of reality where there's a parallel stream that's fully zero trust, that's a lot harder to onboard, let's say, a lot harder to deal with, but once you're there, you can operate in a different fashion? Is that something that's...
Well, I definitely don't know about bonus abuse in the military, but
but fraud in the military is generally non-existent, right? At least internally.
Okay. I mean, I believe it does exist everywhere. That's how life is, really, in every sector, whether it's governmental, including military, into the commercial side. Everyone is always a target, and it comes from many different sectors, different areas. Jurisdictionally, it might not come Europe-wide, might not come from Europe. It might be coming different jurisdictions, different focuses, different reasons for abusing you.
Absolutely.
And attacking you and committing this fraud. Market share was mentioned.
Yeah.
Could be some malicious actors in our sector.
Brittany said, there's fraud as a service, right? So it could even be a competitor, right?
Exactly. And yeah, everyone's paying for it. The same as in the supermarket. It's coming out of a company's profits, so they're going to get that from somewhere, quite frankly.
Yeah.
It's coming out of the government's profits, the same scenario, unfortunately. So, yeah, adding that extra friction with an honesty to the player to say you're having extra friction, but the world you'll be living in, the services you'll be getting will not have that. I think that's a huge step. That's quite a huge step.
Yeah.
That's why I think we should be utilizing what tools we have to continue to utilize and push the least friction possible and try and recognize what we have in our own databases, the own data that we have, very much like the example given, the speed of registration, the copy and pasting, what's being thrown at you, use that data.
The copy and pasting example was a fantastic one, actually.
Yeah.
That's a really, really really good use case.
Yeah, and you're never going to be able to get rid of all fraud. To do that, you would have to just ban all users from your platform to have 100% fraud prevention. So something will get through.
That would make me compliant, so I'm not entirely against that, but I would be out of business.
Or you would want to minimize that as much as possible, because you do not want to be known as the platform where it's easy to get fraud through, where it's easy to do carding or use stolen credit cards, or where it's easy to, if you ATO somebody's account, then be able to liquidate the funds and do withdrawals. Because those exact methods will not only be discussed within fraud groups, but they will be sold and they will be automated. And, we'll see fluctuations. My favorite thing to see in a fraud group is to see a brand that we work with and then followed by the word is down. Because that generally means that their previous method against that company no longer works, and now they're having to regroup and try again. But then also, you touched on customer friction in your last comment. For that, I've also seen some success in what you said of communicating to your users that it is for their benefit. And it's not just something difficult where you want their data to market to them or to take some step that they would be opposed to, but really helping them understand what the user safety benefit is when you ask for an ID or when you ask for some kind of authentication. And I've actually seen one company before that was able to take their NPS or Net Promoter Score for people who had fallen victim to an ATO, and then they asked after the restoration process, what was your experience on our platform? They turned that NPS response into their most positive response in the entire company. And that's compared to people who just wrote in saying, I forgot my password, or I can't figure out how to upload a picture. They took an extremely negative experience and got the best response and satisfaction out of their users because they were open, transparent, and clear about how that ATO happened and how it could be prevented. It's a really great case study.
Yeah, and that I think is a question of how you perceive the world, right? Glass half full or glass half empty. And if you're a glass half full kind of person, you can definitely make something like that happen. So guys, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This was absolutely awesome. Take it easy. Guys, cheers.